Before Rome conquered the world, before Christianity silenced the Druids, the Celts carved their gods into stone, not in temples of marble but in forests and rivers, on cliffs and hidden places. And of all the pantheon they left behind, one figure was so wild, so untamed, that even the sculptors feared to give him a final form. Tonight we walk the halls of Celtic mythology, every god, every hero, every monster that the Druids carved in stone. Stay until the end. The Celtic peoples stretched across Europe from Ireland to Anatolia, and though no two tribes worshipped quite the same way, certain faces appeared again and again in stone and bronze. The Druids taught that the gods walked among mortals, that the boundary between worlds was thin as mist, and so they carved not distant, perfect deities but fierce, earthbound beings who bled and hungered and raged. These are their stories, preserved in marble for 2,000 years. We begin with Toutatis, the god of the tribe itself. Every Celtic clan had a guardian carved in stone, a figure who watched over their land and bloodline. Toutatis was not beautiful. His face was broad, weathered, marked by the struggles of the people he protected. The Druids said he walked the borders of tribal lands at night, driving away those who would steal cattle or bring dishonor. He was the first god you invoked before battle. Next came Taranis, the thunder god whose name meant the one who makes a great noise. The Celts feared the sky. Lightning could burn your village, could strike your king. Taranis was carved with a hammer in one hand and a wheel in the other, the wheel representing the sun's path through heaven. His face was always twisted in rage, mouth open as if he were mid-scream. Thunder, the Druids said, was Taranis laughing at mortal weakness. But Taranis was not the most feared sky god. That honor belonged to Toutiorix, god of war in its most destructive form. Where Taranis was the rage of nature, Toutiorix was calculated slaughter. The Druids carved him in bronze and stone as a warrior whose chariot left bodies in its wake. Young men would pour mead at his feet before riding to battle, knowing they might not return. He demanded payment, either in victory or blood. The Celts needed gods of healing, too. Esus was carved as a figure of quiet power, sometimes shown hanging from a tree or bending to touch the earth. He was the god of plant medicine, of herbs and sacred groves where the sick came seeking remedy. Unlike the violent deities, Esus's face in stone was calm, almost serene. But the Druids whispered that his peace was hard-won. He had learned healing through endless suffering. Epona was the horse goddess, and her sculptures were among the most beloved in Celtic lands. Horses meant wealth, meant war, meant the ability to escape. Epona was carved riding side saddle or standing with her hand on a mare's neck, her face beautiful but distant, as if she heard something in the wind that mortals could not. Warriors blessed their horses in her name. So did merchants, travelers, and anyone whose life depended on the strength of an animal. But not all gods were steady guardians. Belenos was carved as a beautiful youth, almost too beautiful, with light radiating from him in every carved ray. He was the god of sun, of fire, of prophecy. Young people fell under his spell in the sculptures. His face promised power and vision. But the Druids warned that to stare too long at Belenos was to go mad. Light that bright burns the eyes. Prophecy that clear shatters the mind. Where Belenos was light and sanity, Sucellos was the god of the club and the depths. His sculptures showed him gripping a hammer or mallet, his face shadowed and serious. Sucellos was the god of agriculture, yes, but also of the underworld, of the land beneath the earth where crops were born. The Druids taught that he could kill with a single blow or nourish you through winter. He was earth itself, and earth is never gentle. The Celts also carved gods of water and movement. Lugh was the god of the sea, shown emerging from waves or riding in boats carved in stone. His sculptures were fluid, almost liquid in their grace, yet his eyes held something ancient and unknowable. The Druids said Lugh remembered when the world was all water before the gods carved out land. He was kind to those who respected the sea, but to those who mocked him he was merciless. Yet even the gods of water had their terrors. Lugh was carved as a warrior of impossible skill, a god so brilliant that mortal minds struggled to comprehend him. Some sculptures showed him with 4 arms, each gripping a different weapon, as if 2 arms were not enough for all the ways he could kill. The Druids called him the god of all craftsmen, but his true nature was excellence itself, and excellence demands a price from anyone who dares to rival it. The Celts carved their gods of fire and the home, too. Brigid was sculpted as a woman of fierce beauty, often shown with flames rising behind her in the carved stone itself. She was the goddess of poets, smiths, and healers, anyone who worked with fire or fire's metaphorical heat. But Brigid was also the goddess of justice, and the Druids whispered that her flames could purify or punish. To invoke her carelessly was to invite both blessing and catastrophe. But what almost no one remembers is that Brigid had a twin, or some say a shadow. Bres was carved as her opposite, a figure of darkness and blight. Where Brigid made things, Bres unmade them. Where she healed, he rotted. The Druids carved him less often, and always in the deepest parts of sacred groves where few mortals ventured. To even speak his name was to risk his attention, and his attention was never kind. The Celts understood that the gods needed balance. Manannán mac Lugh was carved as the god of the sea's mysteries, the being who dwelt in the liminal space between worlds. Some sculptures showed him holding a sword that could slice anything, others showed him invisible, represented only by empty space where a figure should stand. The Druids taught that Manannán was the guardian of secrets. He protected the boundary between the living and the dead. The Celts also carved their heroes in stone, and these sculptures told stories of mortals who transcended their humanity. Cú Chulainn was a warrior so fierce that his death rage transformed him into something beyond human. The sculptures showed him bound to a standing stone so he could die upright, his muscles tensed, his face contorted with the effort of staying conscious. Even the stone itself seemed to bow before him. No enemy ever dared touch his corpse. Oisin was another hero carved into Celtic memory, the warrior poet who lived so long he saw entire kingdoms crumble to dust. The Druids carved him as an old man, scarred and weary, yet with eyes that held millennia of memory. One sculpture shows him on horseback, returning from the magical lands to find that centuries had passed. His face shows the moment he understands that everyone he loved is long dead, turned to bone and forgotten. Fionn mac Cumhaill was carved as a leader, a hunter-warrior born under a curse. The Druids showed him with hounds at his side, weapons at his hip, face marked by both nobility and tragedy. Fionn was cursed to forever seek what he could never keep: love, loyalty, peace. Every sculpture of him captured a moment of brief contentment before loss took it all away. Yet he endured. The Celts carved him as the god of endurance itself. The Celts carved their monsters too, and these sculptures were often the most unsettling. The Fomorians were carved as giants and demons, distorted bodies and faces twisted with rage and hunger. Unlike the orderly gods, the Fomorians represented chaos, the forces that sought to destroy the world and drag civilization back into primal darkness. The Druids carved them only to warn, only to show what must be fought and defeated. Among the most feared Fomorians was Balor, the giant king with a single eye so poisonous that its gaze could destroy armies. The Druids carved his eye as a tunnel of darkness, so detailed that viewers felt they could fall into it. Balor was imprisoned in a crystal tower guarded by women, and yet prophecy said he would be killed by his own grandson. The sculptures show the moment before that doom, when Balor still believed himself eternal and untouchable. The Druids also carved dragons and serpents, creatures that dwelt in the spaces between the Celtic worlds. These sculptures twisted and coiled, their bodies carved with impossible flexibility, their mouths open in eternal hunger. The Celts believed dragons guarded treasure and wisdom, but only if you were brave or foolish enough to face them. One wrong word, one misstep, and you would become their next meal. But perhaps the most haunting Celtic sculptures are those of the Otherworld, the magical realm where the gods truly dwelt. The Druids carved gateways and thresholds, places where the veil between worlds grew thin. These weren't beautiful places. They were unsettling, dreamlike, with faces of uncertain gender emerging from mist and stone. To look at them too long was to feel yourself slipping away from the mortal world, drawn toward something ancient and timeless. The Druids understood something modern people forget. Not all gods demand worship. Some demand only respect, and some demand only that you stay out of their way. Cernunnos, the horned god of wild animals and untamed nature, was carved as half human, half stag, a being who dwelt in the forests beyond civilization. The Celts honored him not because he blessed them, but because he tolerated their presence in his domain. The Celts carved many gods of the land itself, the spirits that dwelt in trees, stones, and springs. These sculptures were often anonymous, faces worn smooth by time, as if the Druids carved them and then let nature reclaim them. They represented the sacred places themselves, forests where the gods walked, wells where healing water flowed, stones older than memory. To disturb these places was to invite the wrath of something that could outlive nations. As we approach the end of the Pantheon, the sculptures grow darker. The Druids carved the gods of winter, plague, and famine, the forces that could destroy a tribe in a single season. These figures were abstract, sometimes barely recognizable as alive. Cold radiates from them even in the warmth of the museum. Standing before them, you understand why the Celts built fires in winter and made offerings to the sun. Yet nothing compares to the final god, the one the Druids carved last and hid deepest in the sacred groves. This is the god whose name was spoken only once a year, in the darkest nights of winter, and only by the Druids themselves. Even now, almost 2,000 years after the Celts were scattered, standing before his sculpture fills the heart with inexplicable dread. The Celts called him Dullahan, but his true nature was something far older. Dullahan was carved as the headless horseman, or sometimes as a head without a body, or sometimes as something between states of existence. The Druids carved him at the boundary of death itself. He rode between worlds, collecting the names of those about to die. To see him was to know your time had come. The Celts built walls of iron to keep him out, nailed horseshoes above their doors, and still they lived in fear that one night he would come for their name. The Druids taught that Dullahan was not evil exactly. He was necessity, the force that comes for every mortal eventually. You cannot fight him, cannot bargain with him, cannot flee. He arrives when the thread of your fate runs out. The horror in his sculptures comes not from malice but from inevitability. He is the moment when all your struggles end and the otherworld claims what it was always owed. And yet, and this is what the Druids wanted you to understand, Dullahan was not the final god. Beyond death lies the otherworld, where the Celtic gods dwell eternal, where time has no meaning and suffering ends. The Druids carved this promise too, in quiet sculptures hidden in groves. The gods of death were terrible, yes, but they were simply the doorway. What lay beyond was ancient peace, and in that peace dwelt every Celtic god we have seen tonight. The Celtic pantheon carved in stone survives in fragments, in museum halls and hidden forests, in places where modern life hasn't quite reached. These gods still watch, still wait, their marble faces unchanging while kingdoms crumble. The Druids are long gone, but the sculptures remain as proof that the Celts understood something eternal, that the divine is not abstract or distant, but real and alive, carved into stone where anyone with courage enough to look can see them. Which Celtic god terrifies you most? Which one would you have prayed to in the darkness of an ancient forest? Leave your answer below and subscribe to Gods in Stone, because next week we walk another pantheon, we face another collection of gods carved in marble, waiting in museum halls and sacred groves. The gods are watching. Are you brave enough to meet their gaze?